The silence at our dinner table was always the loudest thing in the house. It was a silence filled with everything my family chose not to see. Me, for instance. I was home on leave, sitting in my civilian clothes, and I might as well have been a ghost. All the attention, all the energy in the room was a spotlight on my younger brother, Nikhil. He was holding court as usual, telling some story about a field exercise. He made it sound like he'd single-handedly won a war, when I knew for a fact it was a routine training op. My mother hung on every word, her face glowing with pride. My father just nodded along, carefully moving food around his plate, never quite meeting my eyes. The whole scene felt wrong, unsteady. It reminded me of something that had been bothering me since I arrived. 6 months ago, my mother had called me, crying. The roof, she said, it was leaking. A real disaster waiting to happen before the monsoons. She needed $5,000. I was in a designated conflict zone at the time, and that money was from my hazard pay bonus. I didn't hesitate. I wired it that day, but the roof I'd seen when I pulled up to the house, it was the same old weathered roof. It was a small detail, a loose thread. I filed it away. Then Nikhil leaned across the table, a smirk playing on his lips. He lowered his voice so only I could hear. "Still playing soldier, are you?" He sneered. "Find a nice, safe desk job yet?" The familiar cold knot formed in my stomach. The sting of erasure. I opened my mouth to respond, to say something that would wipe that smirk off his face. But the doorbell rang, a sharp, clean sound that cut through the thick air of the room. I just froze. Everything stopped. And I have to ask you, have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where the universe just intervenes? Where someone else is about to accidentally pull the pin on a grenade you didn't even know you were holding. Tell me about that feeling in the comments. My father went to the door. Standing on the porch was a man in a crisp dress uniform, Captain Evan Joshi, Nikhil's commanding officer. I watched the color drain from my brother's face. The captain stepped inside, his eyes scanning the room professionally until they landed on me. And he stopped. His relaxed posture vanished, and he snapped to attention, his back ramrod straight. He ignored my parents. He walked right past my brother. He stopped 3 feet in front of my chair, his expression one of pure, undiluted respect. He raised his hand in a salute so sharp it could have cut glass. His voice was clear and formal. "Major General Sharma," he said, "welcome home. We weren't expecting you back on domestic soil so soon, Major General." The title hung in the air like smoke. In the ringing silence, I heard my father choke on a sip of water. I saw my mother's proud smile shatter. I saw the utter panic in Nikhil's eyes. And in that moment, as all their carefully constructed lies fell apart around them, one single ice-cold thought clicked into place in my mind. So, this is the story you've been telling yourselves. That night, after the captain left, the house was suffocatingly quiet. The shock from dinner, that moment of public undeniable validation, had evaporated. It left behind something much colder, much sharper. A question. A Major General Sharma. That's who I was. But who had they been telling everyone I was? In the sterile quiet of my childhood bedroom, the one they kept like a museum to a daughter they no longer knew, I opened my laptop. The mission was simple: reconnaissance. I needed to see the narrative they had built. I started with my mother's social media page. It was a masterclass in propaganda. I scrolled back for years and a clear picture began to form. There were dozens of posts about Nikhil, my brother, the brave lieutenant. Photos of him in his uniform, smiling, were always paired with long captions about his sacrifice, his courage, his leadership. He was the family hero. Then I searched for my own name. The posts about me were different. They were vague, pitying, full of phrases like "Anya's difficult path," and "we pray she finds her way." I was the lost soul, the family burden, the low-level functionary who just couldn't quite make it. It wasn't just dismissal. It was a calculated public campaign of erasure. My stomach tightened. This was like reading enemy intelligence reports. The disinformation was strategic. And that's when a specific memory clicked into place with sickening clarity. A phone call from 2 years ago. It was Nikhil, asking for the exact, unclassified name of my unit. He said it was for a family tree project. And there it was, in one of my mother's posts. The name of my unit, framed as a support battalion. The implication was clear. Non-combat, administrative, safe. He wasn't building a family tree. He was gathering tactical misinformation to diminish my service. What's the most blatant lie you've ever seen someone post on social media? I'm genuinely curious. Because it's one thing to stretch the truth, but it's another to construct an entirely false reality for public consumption. Let me know below. As I kept scrolling, I found it. A link to a GoFundMe page, shared by my mother just 3 months ago. The title was Help Our Hero's Son's Business Venture. The description was a novel. It detailed Nikhil's dream of starting a security consulting firm and his need for seed money. And then came the emotional hook. It mentioned my plight, my struggles as a soldier in a dead-end job, and how the family had no one else to rely on for financial security. They were using a fictional version of me, a failure, to grift money for him. The shock was gone. This was cold, analytical fury. They didn't just forget me. Money replaced me. That GoFundMe was the key. It meant the lies weren't just about status, they were about money. Men and I money. My military login gives me access to a suite of multi-factor authentication tools, security protocols they would never understand. I used them to access the joint savings account I'd set up for my parents a decade ago. It was supposed to be, for them, a safety net. I'd been depositing 20% of my salary into it for over 10 years. I expected to see a history of small withdrawals, utilities, groceries, property taxes. I opened the transaction history. My breath caught in my throat. It wasn't small withdrawals. It was a pattern. Large, consistent transfers, always moving money out. Thousands at a time. This was no longer about feelings or narratives. This was data. Cold, hard numbers on a screen. My training took over instantly. In an active operation, emotion is a liability. Facts are ammunition. And I was looking at an armory. Right then, I had a choice. Close the laptop and confront them with what I knew so far, or keep digging. If you found a major unexplained withdrawal from your savings account, what is the very first thing you would do? I knew what I had to do. I kept digging, and a memory of my father surfaced. A conversation from years ago when we first opened the account. He'd insisted, so humbly, just make your mother a signatory, dear. It's easier for her to manage the bills. I'm no good with these things. His passivity, his helplessness. I saw it now. It wasn't a character trait. It was a tactic. It gave him plausible deniability. I scanned the dates of the transfers. And then, I found the entry that made my blood run cold. A transfer of $15,000. The date was the day after I had received a significant commendation bonus for a successful command operation. The transfer description had 2 words, Nikhil. Business. It was followed by a series of smaller but substantial withdrawals. The dates coincided perfectly with a trip Nikhil had taken to a luxury resort in Thailand, a trip he'd flaunted all over his social media. The connection was undeniable. Follow the money. It never lies. I had the blueprint. I opened 2 windows on my screen. On the left, the bank statement. On the right, Nikhil's social media feed. It was time to cross-reference the evidence. I became a forensic accountant of my own life. A $5,000 withdrawal, the one for the new roof my mother cried about, was dated the day before Nikhil posted a picture of his new sports car. Another withdrawal, for $2,000, labeled emergency plumbing repairs, matched the weekend he and his friends posted from front row seats at a major cricket match. Lie after lie, all with a clear price tag. The lies were so casual, so constant. Have you ever caught someone in a lie because of their social media? It's a strange feeling, isn't it? To see the digital proof of their deception right there in black and white. I want to hear the story. This investigation wasn't personal anymore. It was a case file. The subjects were my mother, my father, and my brother, and the crime was grand larceny, coated in a thick, sticky layer of gaslighting. And suddenly, another memory surfaced. My mother on the phone, her voice strained with worry. "Oh, Anya, the house is just falling apart. Your father is so stressed." I checked the date of that call. The same week, the bank statement showed a $3,000 transfer to a high-end electronics store. As I continued my audit, I discovered the most damning piece of evidence yet. A recurring monthly payment. $1,200 every single month to a luxury apartment complex an hour away. Nikhil lived at home. This wasn't his rent. A quick search of the building's name confirmed it was a high-end corporate residence. A secret, paid for by me. Every lie has a price tag. The apartment was the final thread. A secret residence. A secret life. It meant there had to be communication. Coordination. This wasn't just opportunistic theft, this was a conspiracy. I remembered something else. Years ago, my father, the proud technophobe, had asked me to set up his email and sync it to the family's shared cloud drive. "Just back everything up, Anya," he'd said. "You're the expert." My own competence, the thing they resented in me, was about to be their undoing. I navigated to the cloud's archived email folder. It was a digital attic, untouched for years. In the search bar, I typed 2 words. Anya Money. Dozens of emails between my mother and Nikhil appeared. A grim, sickening sense of validation washed over me. The final piece of the puzzle wasn't a surprise, just a confirmation of the ugly picture I'd already assembled. It was all there. What would you do? I mean, really, what would you do if you found concrete, written proof that your own family was methodically, intentionally conspiring against you? I clicked on the oldest one. The subject line was her promotion. My blood went cold. I read the email from my mother to my brother, sent over a year ago. It was a signed confession. Her words were so clear, so casual. She wrote that Anya just got her promotion pay. That she told me the house's foundation was cracked. That it should be good for at least $10,000. And then, the line that broke me. She wrote, "She'll never check. She trusts us." It went on, telling Nikhil that this money should be enough to get his business website and brand materials finalized. And the final sentence, the motive for everything, "We have to make sure you look successful." I leaned back from the screen. The entire fraud, the entire narrative, the entire betrayal was laid bare in a handful of sentences. They hadn't just taken my money. They had weaponized my trust. It was all there. Bunane wrote it all down. I closed the laptop. The screen went black, but the words from that last email were burned into my mind. "She'll never check. Trusts us." The shock, the grief, the raw sense of betrayal. It felt like a storm that had raged through me and was now finally passing. What was left in its wake was a strange and terrible calm. A cold, clear focus. I stood up from the desk where I'd conducted my investigation and moved to the other side of the room, to a small, clean wooden table. My childhood homework desk. I took out a fresh legal pad and a single black pen. The emotional phase was over. The planning phase had begun. My training kicked in. The years of mission planning, of threat assessment, of turning chaos into a sequence of actionable steps. I drew a line down the center of the page. On the left, I wrote the heading, assets. On the right, liabilities. This was no longer about a daughter and her family. I was an auditor, a prosecutor, and I was building my case. Under assets, the list was short but potent. 1. My rank, Major General. It conferred authority and credibility. 2. My security clearance, a testament to my character and reliability. 3. My documented service record, unimpeachable. 4. My independent finances, I wasn't reliant on them for anything. 5. Captain Joshi, a neutral, high-ranking witness to my status, and by extension, to their lies. Then I turned to the liabilities column. Their liabilities. My pen moved steadily, documenting every piece of the fraud I had uncovered, every single fraudulent withdrawal, with dates and amounts, every lie-filled social media post, with the specific language and the date it was posted, the GoFundMe campaign, with its manipulative narrative, the incriminating emails, cross-referenced with the bank statements, creating an undeniable timeline of the conspiracy. I was mapping it all out, turning a web of deceit into a linear, provable sequence of events. When you have a huge task ahead of you, something that feels overwhelming, are you a list maker? What's your method for organizing chaos? For me, it's about turning the enemy's position into a map you can read. And that's when a memory of a difficult field exercise came back to me. We'd had fragmented intelligence, intercepts, informant reports, aerial surveillance, and my task was to build a complete organizational chart of the enemy's command structure, to see who gave the orders, who carried them out, who benefited, and who just provided cover. I used that exact same mental process now. I sketched out a small chart on the page. At the top, my mother, the CGO, the chief gaslighting officer, who masterminded the strategy. Beside her, my brother Nikhil, the golden child CEO, the primary beneficiary and public face of the enterprise. And beneath them both, my father, the silent chairman, the one who enabled the fraud through conflict avoidance and quiet funding. It was while I was reviewing the funding, reconciling the numbers one last time, that I found it. A new layer. A deeper one. I had been focused on the joint account, the one I funded. But, on a hunch, I looked for my father's name on other transfers. And there they were. Withdrawals for Nikhil, not from the joint account, but directly from my father's personal pension account. The transactions were always initiated by my mother. But it was his son. Money. His life savings. This whole time I had seen him as willfully ignorant, a passive participant. I was wrong. He wasn't just silent. He was the financial wellspring. He was actively allowing his own resources to be plundered to fund the lie. His silence wasn't weakness. It was active, expensive complicity. The realization settled in my bones. This wasn't a family problem. It's an operation. I flipped to a clean page on the legal pad. At the top, I wrote a new heading, Autent State, the objective. An operation is nothing without a clearly defined goal. This wasn't going to be an emotional shouting match. It wasn't going to be about getting them to say they were sorry. Apologies are feelings, and feelings can be faked. I was done with feelings. I was seeking facts. Undeniable, verbalized, witnessed facts. I wrote down my objectives, my terms of victory. 1. Full financial accounting. A complete ledger of the $87,000, followed by a legally binding repayment plan. 2. Public correction. They would be required to dismantle the false narrative they created, piece by piece to every person they had lied to. 3. Professional consequences. I would confront Nikhil not with family disappointment, but with the specific articles of the Uniform Code of Military Justice he had violated. His career was built on a lie, and he needed to understand that I had the power to expose that. 4. Forced acknowledgement. This was the most important part. They would have to verbally acknowledge the unspecific facts of the fraud. No blanket apologies. They would have to say the words. We took the money for the roof and gave it to Nikhil for a car. We lied about Anya's service to make Nikhil look better. This would dismantle their ability to use gaslighting and denial as a defense. When you're preparing to confront someone who has deeply wronged you, what do you think is more powerful? Demanding an apology, or demanding they admit the specific, detailed facts of what they did? I felt a sense of absolute, chilling clarity. I knew exactly what needed to happen. My job was to create an environment where the truth was the only possible outcome, where their emotional manipulations had no tactical value, and that meant knowing my own limits, my own line in the sand. I thought back to a negotiation training module from years ago. The instructor said, you must never enter a negotiation without knowing your BATNA, your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. It's the outcome you accept if the other party refuses to meet your terms. My batna was simple, and it gave me all the power. Complete and total severance. Walking away entirely, armed with every piece of evidence to protect myself from any future slander or attempts to rewrite history. I was prepared to lose my family. They needed to know that. With my strategy set, I did one final piece of reconnaissance. That secret $1,200 apartment lease was a loose thread. A professional front requires a professional address. I did a quick business registry search for Nikhil's company name. And there it was. The address listed as its official corporate headquarters was the exact same address as the luxury apartment, the one he was paying for with my stolen money. That was it. The final link in the chain. He hadn't just committed financial fraud against his family. He had registered a fraudulent business using stolen funds as its operating capital and listed the secret residence as his corporate address. It was a single, provable, contained case of fraud. There were no more questions. There were no more doubts. I had the case, the strategy, and the objective. I put the cap back on my pen. They had been in control of the narrative for years. That was about to change. But they will not get to define the terms of surrender. My plan was complete. The legal pad on my desk was a blueprint for justice, outlining every fact, every objective, every contingency. I had the what and the how. But as I stared at the numbers in my financial audit, one specific transaction gnawed at me. $2,000, sent 9 months ago. The line item was for my Aunt Sona. Her cataract surgery. I had routed the money through my mother, and in the chaos of my own investigation, I'd never confirmed it arrived. I told myself it was just a loose end to tie up. A final check on the integrity of my data. But I think, deep down, I knew I was pulling on a thread that would unravel something far worse than I had already found. I picked up the phone and called her. We went through the usual pleasantries, her voice warm but frail. Then, as casually as I could manage, I asked her how her eyes were feeling after the surgery. There was a pause, a hesitation that told me everything before she even spoke a word. Then she told me my mother had explained that I'd run into some trouble with my posting, that I couldn't afford the surgery money right now, and that I was too embarrassed to say so myself. She was told not to bother me about it, and then came the part that made my blood run cold. She told me that Nikhil, had been kind enough to lend her $500 to cover her initial consultations. They hadn't just stolen the $2,000 I sent for her, they had stolen it, then used my fabricated failure as a cover story, and then leveraged that lie to position my brother as the family savior with a fraction of my own money. It was a new layer of violation, a level of cruelty I hadn't anticipated. What is worse? Someone stealing from you directly, or someone using your name and reputation to lie to the people you love and manipulate their compassion. Suddenly, a memory of the phone call where I offered the money became sharp and clear. I'd offered to send the funds directly to my aunt's bank account, but my mother had insisted. Her voice was so smooth, so reasonable. She'd said, No, that will just confuse her with all the bank details. Let me handle it. It's all family. Her insistence on being the middleman, it wasn't about convenience. It was about control. Absolute control over the flow of both money and information. This wasn't just a family drama anymore. This was a community-level deception. I ended the call with my aunt, my mind reeling. A few minutes later, my phone buzzed. My aunt, trying to be helpful, had forwarded me an email chain. The sender was my mother. The recipients were dozens of cousins and family friends. The email was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. It spoke of my unfortunate circumstances, my inability to contribute to the family, painting me as a charity case. And then it pivoted. It began to praise Nikhil's new business venture, hinting that he was looking for friendly investors to get his noble enterprise off the ground. They were using my ghost, the ghost of a failed daughter. They were using me as the before picture to sell everyone on his fraudulent after. They weren't just erasing me. They were using my ghost. This changed the operational parameters. The conspiracy was wider and more venomous than I had imagined. If they were willing to build this elaborate lie to defraud our own relatives, then what was Nikhil's business? What was his career? How deep did the fabrication go? My authority as a major general grants me certain privileges, certain channels I can open. I made a discreet, official inquiry through a trusted colleague in the military's administrative branch. I requested a non-classified service record overview for Lieutenant Nikhil Sharma, citing a family-related security protocol. That was all I had to say. While I waited for the official file, I went to work on his public facade. I started with his security consulting business online. The website was slick, full of mission statements about integrity and honor. But it was vague. The photos were all stock images of men in suits shaking hands. I did a reverse image search on the testimonials, glowing reviews from so-called clients. Every single one was a fake profile. The business address, as I already knew, was the luxury apartment he was paying for with my money. I searched the state's corporate registry. There were no filings, no business license, nothing. Have you ever had that gut feeling? That deep, intuitive certainty that someone's successful life was a complete and total sham? What were the red flags that gave it away? For me, it was the details. Or rather, the lack of them. His entire professional identity was a house of cards. A detached, almost clinical pity washed over me. He wasn't some criminal mastermind. He was a child playing dress-up, enabled his entire life by a mother who told him he was a king. He'd finally built a fantasy world too big and too fragile to sustain. That flicker of pity was fleeting, though. It was immediately replaced by the grim necessity of demolition, and a memory surfaced of him at a family dinner a year ago, bragging about a special commendation he'd received for strategic planning. The phrase had seemed off to me at the time, too grand for his role. It felt rehearsed. Now I knew why. The next day, the file I requested arrived. It was password protected. I opened it. It was all there. Nikhil's record was not one of a hero. It was painfully average, worse than average. There were a few minor disciplinary notes on his record for exaggerating reporting and unauthorized use of communication channels. And the special commendation for strategic planning? It was a standard, unit-wide citation for simple participation in a successful field exercise. It had been given to over 300 other personnel. He was, at best, a mediocre officer. At worst, he was a documented liar, and his entire career was just as fraudulent as his business. And he didn't build a business. He built a stage. I had the full scope of the fraud. I had the what and the how. But I was still missing the most critical piece of intelligence, the why. This level of sustained deception, this lifelong campaign, it had to have a source, a genesis. I felt compelled to dig deeper, to go back to the beginning. I went up into the dusty attic of my family home, the place where old memories were stored and forgotten. I was looking for a box of my old things. Academic awards, debate trophies, things I hadn't thought about in years. Instead, I found a different box, a heavy cardboard box with my mother's name on it. It was full of her old diaries and letters. I hesitated. This felt like a deeper violation than reading her emails. This was her history, her private thoughts. But I wasn't a daughter in that moment. I was the prosecutor of this case, and a prosecutor needs to understand motive, history, intent. I opened a diary from 15 years ago. Page after page was filled with my mother's anxieties about our family's social standing, her obsession with Nikhil's potential, her worries that he wasn't ambitious enough. And then I found the entries about me. I read a letter she had written to her sister, complaining that I was too serious, too focused, that I wasn't charming like Nikhil. She wrote that she was worried my success would make Nikhil feel bad. A profound, hollow sadness washed over me. This wasn't a recent development. This was the core principle of my family's operating system. It was a fundamental bug in the code that had been running my entire life. I was punished for my competence, and he was rewarded for his mediocrity. Do you believe parents can truly have a favorite child without it causing serious, lasting damage to everyone involved? Share your thoughts. Because as I sat there, I saw the proof of the damage it had caused. It was like a key turning, unlocking a dozen other memories. I remembered winning a prestigious national scholarship in high school. At the celebration dinner, my mother barely mentioned it. Instead, she spent the entire night talking about how Nikhil had just won his school's Most Improved Award in sports. She had framed my national-level academic achievement and his minor school award as events of equal importance, a way to ensure his light was never dimmed by mine. The pattern was always there. I just hadn't been willing to see it. I kept digging through the box, and at the very bottom, I found it. A single letter, folded and worn. It was from my mother, written to Nikhil right after he'd joined the military. It was the philosophical blueprint for the entire conspiracy. In her familiar, looping handwriting, she had given him his life's mission. She had written, "Your sister will go far, but you are the one who will carry this family's name. People will always help a charming man before they help a capable woman. Remember that. Use it. Let her pay the bills. You build the legacy. Let her pay the bills. You build the legacy." It was all there. The motive, the justification, the core of the poison. I finally understood. The money, the lies, the fraud, they were just symptoms. The disease was her narrative. Her desperate need to craft a world where her son was the hero, and her daughter was the supporting character, the wealthy spinster aunt who funded his adventures. This wasn't about money. It was about making the world fit her story. I held my mother's letter in my hand. Let her pay the bills, you build the legacy. The philosophical blueprint for my own erasure. The investigation was over. I had the motive, the means, the opportunity. I had the full scope of the conspiracy. But data on a hard drive and words in a diary are intangible. To be effective, a case needs to be presented. It needs to be organized, undeniable, and physical. The next morning, I left the house and drove to a local print shop. The digital investigation was over. It was time to forge the weapons. I spent the entire day there. I didn't just print documents, I curated an indictment. I printed the bank statements first, using the shop's color printer to highlight every fraudulent withdrawal in stark blood-red ink. Then came the social media posts, years of them, all time-stamped, showing my brother's fabricated life and my mother's pitying narrative about me. I printed the GoFundMe page, with its manipulative lies about my struggles. I printed the entire email chain my aunt had forwarded me, the one where my mother used my name to solicit money from our extended family. I printed the email, the one between my mother and my brother, discussing the lie about the cracked foundation. I printed the property records for the luxury apartment and the corporate registration, or lack thereof, for my brother's sham business. Page after page spooled out of the printer. Each one was a separate betrayal, a separate piece of the fraud. When you prepare for a serious, life-altering conversation, do you bring receipts? Do you arm yourself with the facts? Tell me about a time you came prepared with proof. With a heavy stack of paper in my hands, I moved to a large table. I took out a 3-hole punch and began the methodical work of organizing the evidence. Each punch was a sharp, percussive sound in the quiet shop. Each page was a round of ammunition I was loading into a magazine. This process, it was familiar. It reminded me of my early days as a junior officer, preparing briefing books for generals before major operations. Every detail had to be triple-checked, every potential question anticipated, every piece of intelligence cross-referenced. The stakes were different then, but the process was the same. You leave no room for doubt. You leave no room for misinterpretation. I gave this binder that same level of meticulous, dispassionate attention. I organized the pages chronologically, creating a narrative of the fraud that was impossible to refute. When I was done, I slid the stack of paper, now 2 inches thick, into a black binder. On the spine, I inserted a label. And on the cover, I created a title page, simple and official. It read, "The Sharma Family Financial Review, 2018 to 2025. Before I closed the binder, I did one last thing. I had created a spreadsheet to track the funds, but I hadn't looked at the final sum. I'd been focused on the individual thefts. Now, I clicked on the cell at the bottom of the column. The number that appeared stunned me. Even after everything I'd learned, $87,450. Seeing it there, as a single figure, it transformed the case. This wasn't just a series of petty betrayals and family lies anymore. A number that large has a legal name. It was grand larceny. That number would be my opening statement. I closed the binder. It felt heavy in my hands, dense with the weight of it all. There was no joy in this. No feeling of victory. Just the grim satisfaction of being prepared. The truth is heavy. They are about to feel the weight. I drove home with the binder on the passenger seat beside me. It was my case file. My evidence, but evidence alone wasn't enough for this operation. A confrontation with my family would just devolve into a storm of gaslighting, tears, and emotional manipulation. They would try to make it about feelings, about intentions. I couldn't let that happen. The situation required a framework they couldn't dismantle. It required an authority they would be forced to respect. That night, I made one more phone call. I dialed the number for Captain Evan Joshi. When he answered, I kept my voice perfectly calm, perfectly professional. I was not a daughter seeking help. I was a superior officer extending a professional courtesy. I didn't mention stolen money, family drama, or years of betrayal. I stated, simply and factually, that I was convening a formal family meeting to discuss a serious discrepancy I had uncovered. A discrepancy regarding Lieutenant Nikhil Sharma's stated professional activities and his financial representations. The language was deliberate. It was the language of an official inquiry. I then asked if he, as Nikhil's commanding officer, would be willing to attend as an impartial observer. I was clear about his role. It was not to take sides, but purely to offer clarity on military regulations and the expectations of conduct for an officer, should the topic arise. I wasn't asking for a favor. I was framing it as a matter of professional integrity, a matter of duty. In a personal conflict, especially with family, would you ever consider bringing in an impartial third party? Not for emotional support, but as a formal witness, to keep things grounded in fact. There was a pause on the other end of the line, and then the captain responded. He recognized the gravity in my tone, the unspoken weight of my request. He agreed without hesitation. My internal state was calm, fully in command. I was using the structure and protocol of the military, the world I understood, the world I trusted, to bring order to the chaos of the world that had betrayed me. This course of action felt right, because it was rooted in established procedure. I recalled the military protocol for formal inquiries and non-judicial punishments. There are always witnesses. The process must be transparent and conducted by the book in order to be considered legitimate. I was simply applying that same proven principle to my family. Just before we ended the call, Captain Joshi said something that became the final piece of intelligence I needed. He said it offhandedly, but it landed with the force of a tectonic shift. He told me, "It's good you're doing this." To be honest, Major General, some of us in his command have had concerns about Lieutenant Sharma's narrative for a while. It never quite matched his performance reports. I thanked him and hung up. His words echoed in my mind. It confirmed my deepest suspicion. My brother's lies weren't just a secret kept within the family home. They had bled into his professional life. His reputation was already compromised. The people he worked with, the people whose respect he craved, already saw the cracks in his facade. His house of cards was even weaker than I had realized, and it solidified the correctness of my strategy. This confrontation couldn't be just me versus them. It needed an official presence. Then this requires a witness, not a shoulder to cry on. The day of the confrontation arrived. There was no more investigation to be done, no more evidence to gather. The dossier sat on my desk, a 2-inch thick monument to their betrayal. The call to Captain Joshi was complete. All the pieces were in place. That evening, I waited for them to gather in the living room, ready to move to the dining table for dinner. The atmosphere was deceptively normal. My mother was talking about a neighbor. My father was half listening. Nikhil was on his phone. It was the last moment of peace their fabricated world would ever know. Before they could sit down for their meal, I spoke. My voice was calm, quiet, but it cut through the room. I told them we would not be eating yet, that there was a family meeting in the living room. Now, it wasn't a request. I had already prepared the room. I had taken the comfortable sofa and armchairs and moved them aside. In their place, I had arranged 4 simple dining chairs in a square, facing each other. It was a sterile, confrontational setup. A small, bare table sat in the middle, and on it, I placed the thick black binder. My father looked confused. My mother looked annoyed at the disruption. My brother, Nikhil, looked wary. They saw the formality, the coldness of the arrangement, and they knew something was wrong. Reluctantly, they took their seats. My heart rate was steady. I felt a strange sense of detachment, as if I were stepping outside of myself, observing the scene from a tactical command post. The setup was intentional. This deliberate arrangement of furniture, it mimics the setup for a formal mediation or a corporate board meeting. It's designed to strip the environment of any familial comfort, to establish that the old rules no longer apply. What's the most tense family meeting you've ever been a part of? The kind where the air is so thick you can't breathe, and everyone is avoiding eye contact. They sat there in silence for a moment. And then I saw it. I saw their eyes fix on the binder. I watched as their expressions shifted, one by one. Confusion gave way to curiosity, then to a dawning, sickening horror. They didn't know what was in it, but they knew, instinctively, that it was a case file. They knew this wasn't a discussion. It was a presentation, and their united front, the one they had maintained for decades, began to crack before I had even spoken a single word. My internal clock counted down to 0. The room is set. The proceedings will now begin. I remained standing. I let the silence hang for a moment longer, before I placed my hands on the binder and opened it. My voice, when I spoke, was a monotone. The same voice I've used to read after action, reports into a microphone for official transcription. Steady, clear, detached from the harrowing content of the report itself. I told them we were there to discuss a series of unauthorized financial transfers and misrepresentations. I gave them the number first, so there would be no ambiguity. Totaling $87,450, I said, over a period of 7 years. I looked directly at my father. Dad, I said, my voice flat. You are the silent chairman. You enabled this entire operation through your willful ignorance and your financial complicity. I turned a page. I looked at my mother. Mom, you are the chief gaslighting officer. You masterminded the narrative, you executed the fraud, and you manipulated everyone, including your own family. I turned another page, the plastic sheet making a soft, clinical sound in the quiet room. I looked at my brother. And, Nikhil, I said, you are the sole beneficiary. I proceeded, page by page. I laid out the thefts, matching each one to a lie they had told me. I read aloud from the printout of my mother's email, the one where she discussed telling me the foundation is cracked, so she could get at least $10,000 for Nikhil's business because she'll never check. She trusts us. I held up the side-by-side comparisons of the social media posts next to the highlighted bank statements, the $5,000 withdrawal for the roof next to the purchase receipt for Nikhil's car, the $2,000 plumbing repair next to the charge for his front row sports tickets. I became a machine delivering data. Each fact was a blow, and I watched them land without flinching. The years of being gaslit, of being made to feel crazy, had inoculated me. Their shocked expressions, their dawning shame, it had no effect on me. I was simply reading the charges. If you were in that room, a silent witness to this, what do you think your facial expression would be? I continued through the binder. When I got to the section detailing the $2,000 I had sent for Aunt Sona's cataract surgery, I detailed how the money never arrived, how they had used it, and then painted me as a failure to her, while Nikhil played the hero with a $500 loan. And I saw it. My father flinched. He physically recoiled, just for a second. It was the first genuine crack in his composure. The betrayal of his own sister. That was a line even he struggled to ignore. I had found his weak point. I paused, letting that fact settle in the room. Facts don't have feelings. It's time you were introduced. Nikhil was the first to break. Of course he was. He started to bluster, his voice rising, a pathetic mix of fear and indignation. He said it was insane, that I was twisting things, that I was crazy. He was falling back on the family's oldest defense tactic, attacking my sanity. But his outburst was part of the plan. I had anticipated it. And as he started to raise his voice, the doorbell rang. The sound was sharp, precise, and perfectly on cue. I looked at my father. "Get that, would you, Dad?" I said, my voice calm. He rose, confused, and opened the door. Standing there, in his full dress uniform, was Captain Avan Joshi. He stepped inside, his posture immaculate, his gaze sweeping over the tense scene in the living room. Nikhil's face went completely ashen. He froze. I turned my attention back to him, my voice like ice. "Nikhil," I said softly, "you seem to have misrepresented your service record. But it's all right here." I tapped the binder. No special commendations, a mediocre performance review, and several disciplinary notes for exaggeration and unauthorized use of communications. I then looked past him, to his captain. I didn't raise my voice. I simply posed a question. "Captain," I asked, "would the act of registering a fraudulent business, funded entirely by stolen money, fall under the definition of conduct unbecoming an officer?" Describe the look on my brother's face in one word. He was trapped. He looked from my cold, analytical eyes to his captain's profoundly disappointed ones. The two worlds he had tried to con, his family and the military, had just converged in his living room, and there was no escape. The memory of him sneering at me at the dinner table flashed in my mind, the words echoing as if he'd just said them. This was the checkmate. The golden child's pedestal had just been pulverized, and I gave his own words back to him as a verdict. "Still playing soldier, are you, Nikhil?" Captain Joshi didn't have to say a thing. His silent, official presence was the judgment. His look of deep professional disappointment was more damning to Nikhil than any court-martial could ever be. I saw my father, the silent chairman, staring at the captain. He was now confronted by a second silent authoritative figure, one who represented a code of honor his family had systematically violated. With Nikhil neutralized, I turned my attention back to my parents. My mother immediately switched tactics. The shock wore off, and the waterworks began. She started to cry, her voice breaking as she began with the classic line, "We only did it because we love him. We were just trying to—" I held up a hand. A single sharp gesture, and she stopped. "No," I said. "The time for stories is over. Now we deal only in facts." My voice was still quiet, but it held the absolute authority in the room. I recalled the strict, unforgiving terms of military justice. Violations have clear, unavoidable consequences. There is no room for "but I meant well." I was applying that same clarity here. I laid out the sentence. "A repayment plan for the full amount will be drafted by an attorney and sent to you tomorrow." I stated, "You will call every single person you lied to, and you will tell them the truth about my career and about Nikhil's deceptions. You will call Aunt Sona, you will apologize, and you will pay for her surgery out of your own funds." These are not requests. These are the terms. Do you think they will actually follow through? Or will they try to find a new narrative once I'm gone? There was no anger left in me, only the stark reality of the consequences. I was not their daughter in this moment. I was a creditor, demanding payment on a debt that was both financial and moral. My mother, for the first time in my entire life, was silent. The gaslighting had failed. The emotional manipulation had failed. Faced with the undeniable, documented reality in the binder, and the uniformed symbol of a world of honor and consequence, her primary weapons had been neutralized. She had no response. Her silence was her surrender. Accountability is not an emotion. it's a balance sheet." Captain Joshi gave me a single curt nod of acknowledgement before he turned and left. The heavy front door clicked shut behind him, and the sound echoed in the silent room like a gavel falling. The trial was over. Nikhil, the Golden Child CEO, slumped in his chair, all the swagger and bluster gone. He looked small, utterly defeated, like a child who had just been told that the fantasy world he lived in wasn't real. My father, the silent chairman, just put his head in his hands. A single dry sob escaped him, a sound of total ruin. My mother, however, she was different. The chief gaslighting officer did what she always did. When one tactic failed, she switched to another. The tears stopped instantly. The mask of the heartbroken mother fell away, and in its place was a hard, resentful anger. Her eyes narrowed, and she spat the words at me, her voice dripping with venom. She asked me how, after all they did for me, this was how I repaid them, by humiliating my brother. Why do you think she immediately switched to anger and blame? What does that say about a person, when their first instinct after being caught is not remorse, but rage? I didn't engage. I didn't defend myself. There was nothing left to say. Her reaction was the final, irrefutable piece of evidence. It proved beyond any doubt that she was incapable of remorse. She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was only sorry that she had been caught. In that moment, I knew with absolute certainty that there was nothing left to salvage. Any hope I might have harbored for a real apology, for genuine regret, vanished. I looked at her and I felt nothing. The catharsis I might have expected wasn't there. There was no triumphant satisfaction. Just a vast, quiet emptiness. The battle was won, but the war was against my own family, and now I stood completely alone on the battlefield. It reminded me of the feeling after completing a long and arduous mission. The immediate relief of success is always followed by a profound exhaustion, and the quiet, grim assessment of the costs. This felt the same. The victory was the silence where a family used to be. I slowly closed the black binder, the sound of the cover thudding shut echoing the closing of the front door. I tapped it once with my fingers. I told her the repayment plan would be in her email tomorrow. Then I turned and walked out of the room. One verdict is in. The sentence is distance. The next morning, I packed my duffel bag. There wasn't much to pack. I had been living out of a bag for most of my adult life. As I stood at the front door, my father appeared in the hallway. He looked aged, broken. All the quiet authority he once held was gone, replaced by a hollowed-out shame. He started to speak my name, his voice cracking, but the words wouldn't come. He couldn't finish. I looked at him, not with the anger of the previous night, but with a kind of clinical assessment. He was a variable in an equation that had finally been solved. I laid out the new terms of engagement. My voice was quiet, but firm. I told him that the money would be repaid, that this was the only conversation we would be having from now on. I specified that all future communication regarding the repayment schedule would be conducted via email only. I would manage the payments. There would be no more phone calls, no more opportunities for emotional manipulation or tearful excuses. He just stood there, his shoulders slumped, and he nodded. A single, slow nod of acceptance. In that moment, our relationship was officially demoted. We were no longer family. We were parties in a formal financial arrangement. Is it possible, do you think, to have a real relationship with family after a betrayal this deep? What would it take to even begin to rebuild that trust? As I stated my terms, I felt a strange sense of liberation in this final, painful act. This was a harsh boundary, but it was a safe boundary. I was defining the relationship on my terms for the first time in my life, and I thought of the formal rules of engagement, the ROE, that we establish before every deployment. They are clear, precise lines that cannot be crossed, designed to reduce chaos and ensure operational safety. I was simply setting a personal ROE for my family. And my father's reaction. His quiet acceptance was more telling than anything else. Unlike my mother's rage or my brother's complete collapse, his silent shame was the most profound admission of guilt. He knew he deserved these terms. He knew the judgment was fair. In his silence, he finally acknowledged the truth I had presented in the binder. He knew who I was now, and I am no longer their daughter. I am their consequence. I walked away from the house and I didn't look back. The sun was bright, and the air felt clean. As I reached the end of the street, my phone buzzed. It was a text message. I looked down and saw it was from Captain Joshi. It was short and professional. He said that my integrity was a credit to the uniform. He called me Major General. And he told me to let him know where I land. I took a deep breath. The first one that didn't feel heavy, that didn't feel tight in my chest. I was not just a soldier. I was not just a rank, and I was no longer just a daughter. I was the investigator who uncovered a conspiracy. I was the prosecutor who built the case. And I was the judge who delivered the sentence. I had conducted a full forensic audit of my own life, and I had finally closed the books on the fraudulent accounts. And a strange thing happened. My mind, for the first time in days, wasn't pulled to the past. There were no flashbacks, no sudden memories of betrayals, big or small. My mind was quiet. It was focused on the road ahead, and I realized that the absence of a flashback was itself the final discovery. The past no longer had a hook in me. Now that it's over, what is the first thing a person should do for themselves when they are finally truly free? I thought about the very traits my family had seen as flaws. My quiet nature, my methodical focus, my calm demeanor. They had punished me for them my whole life. But I saw the truth now. My superpower wasn't a secret. It was the thing they had always criticized. It was my methodical, forensic, and calm nature that had been my salvation. Those very traits were the tools I used to set myself free. I didn't have to change who I was. I just had to learn how to deploy myself correctly. I put the phone back in my pocket and kept walking. The future was a blank slate, an unwritten operational plan. I had reclaimed my story not by shouting, but by proving. And I was not defined by their betrayal, but by my methodical response to it. When the case is closed, my life is now open.